Hello, this is Chris Ott, and I'm back with this part 12 in this series, which I've titled just Metaphysics. And I need to first talk about why I've been gone for so long, about a month. I kind of was at a point where I had to do a lot of thinking about all this. And one of the things that got me off track was I got a comment. I felt like the last video, number 11, which was called Facts and Logic, was it covered what I intended to cover, but it wasn't very clear. I didn't think it was clear. When I watched it back myself, I was like, this isn't very good. But I left it, and I always have the option to redo, but I hate to redo a video because it's actually, you're not sure whether you've said something in the previous version, and it becomes difficult to start over. You're not sure what, you get mixed up in your head about what you've said already. So I tend to not do that, but here I'm gonna redo this one, but mostly I'm gonna be focusing more carefully on certain points. Now, I got a comment on that video, and it's from a person that I've known online for a long time, and I like him a lot, and he's a great guy and really smart. But he wrote, I got your points, but a script would have made it easier to tune into the flow of the speech. And anyway, that kind of was like saying, well, you kind of needed a script, which sort of implies that maybe I got lost. I wasn't lost. A script wouldn't really help, and I've never had a script for anything I've ever recorded. Even being interviewed on, community access TV, I don't go in with a script, partly because you don't know what the person's going to ask. And, but it's not like a movie. I'm talking about something that I'm thinking while I'm saying it. And what I usually do to prepare is I think about a topic for a long time. And then finally, when it kind of builds up enough material, I do a talk. And I either get everything I intended to, or I don't. I find if I have notes, I get lost in trying to find the things in the notes, and that doesn't work for me. The other thing, I did a series called Talks with Kerry, and that was with a guy I like a lot named Kerry McPherson. And he was sort of I asked him to play my Ed McMahon, sit with me. He's blind, and he's got a lot of to me, he has a lot of personality, especially when the camera's off. And anyway, he did a great job. But he used to say over and over, he'd say, Chris, you should have bullet points. Okay, well, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm doing philosophy, and I'm not doing lists. I'm not listing a bunch of things like, the 10 ways to get rich. So you would definitely have a bullet list. You wouldn't even need the bullet list, but you might just to go, what number am I on? But that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing the connection between one idea and the next idea is usually a logical segue. And it's not, checking a list. I've never been interested in listing things. It's not how I organize my material. And every one of I usually do talks in series. For some reason, they always come to about, 11 or 12 parts in the past. And these usually have a subject that I have in mind, and I stop doing it when I feel like I've covered it. And anyway, that's just a bit of that about how I work. But to this point of tune into the flow of the speech. I don't know. I'm not really a musician. I'm not a poet. I don't even know what that means. I'm not trying to have a flow. I'm trying to convey concepts, and that's all I'm trying to do. If I was an entertainer, I would have more than 50 views, which is about how many I get on most channels. I'm not that entertaining. That's just part of the nature of the game. It's kind of dry. I've listened to probably 100 talks on philosophy that were over 2 hours long when I was getting my graduate degree. And none of them had a script, but I got it, especially thinking about it later. And that's kind of the way philosophy works. With video, it's a little like a book. You can always back up and watch it again. But in this rare case, I feel like what I was saying was important enough to me that I want to go over it again before I go on. And the things that I want to cover next are really important to me. So it makes it all the more necessary to get this out of the way and to have clearly stated these points. So I'm back to the subject of facts and logic. What's the point of the thing? That's always a thing that I realize sometimes gets lost. What's the point Chris is trying to make? Okay. The point I'm trying to make is that for the most part, no philosopher has ever come up with a way that we can know anything with absolute certainty. There's always a possibility of doubt. Logically, there's a possibility of doubt. There's no way you could escape it. The only thing you could do is you could say, I trust Jesus because he's God and he knows, and that's fine, but you're going to have to rely on faith. And it's possible. But you don't know that until you have Christ consciousness, and then you can see that he knew. But until then, let's just admit reality. And that is something that no philosopher today would dispute. That there's, although I'm going to at the end of this, that's the irony you get again too, is we can't know anything for sure. Okay, so the first thing I tried to do was convey this, and maybe my examples weren't good, but this isn't controversial amongst philosophers. Because there are all kinds of caveats that you have to add when you say something. You say, well, I heard this from so-and-so. I saw this with my own eyes. That's how I understood what I saw. I believe that I wasn't drunk that day. I wasn't hallucinating, but I could have been. And there's a speaker that I listen to named Alexander Mercura, and he was a lawyer, and he lives in England, and he's retired, and he talks about geopolitics, and he basically comments on the news. And I have just think very highly of the way he speaks, because everything he says, he then qualifies it. He goes, well, this is what it says. I have this from a reliable source that's always been reliable in the past. And he qualifies that he can't be positive, but this is his best understanding. And that honesty really impresses me. He understands this issue philosophically. Lawyers study logic and not that much philosophy, but it's even in logic. So the next thing I wanted to cover, because a lot of people say, well, I'm using logic, so I have to be right because I'm logical. I use logic very carefully. Logic can't tell you if you're right, and I'll explain that. There are mainly two forms of logic. The third I'm not getting into. It's called retroduction. But or abduction, and you can look that up, and Wikipedia has a little article on it, but mainly, and it's new, mainly there's deduction and induction, and they can't tell you something with certainty. First one is induction. So it's just based on the idea that patterns, by definition, if there's a pattern and you've noticed it of things, of events occurring, if that pattern has occurred always in the past, it's likely to continue in the future. So you get an expectation of something because that goes with the pattern. So if, all my life, the United States has an election in November. And so, November's coming up, and so I expect that there'll be an election. And that's called, I know that by induction. I induce that from past instances. So that those past instances are evidence that it's going to continue in the future because that's a pattern. But however, it's possible that somebody will come along and cancel the election. We just don't know. It's possible that the Earth will be hit by a comet and there'll be, destruction, people die, and there won't be an election. One of the most famous cases was pointed out by David Hume in the 1700s, and he said, induction is like the sun will rise tomorrow, based on the fact that it's always risen in the past. However, it's possible the sun won't rise tomorrow. Maybe, as I said, the Earth will be hit by a comet. Maybe and it'll start turning the other way, and so or someone get thrown off its orbit or just busted into pieces. So the past is a very strong indicator of the future, but doesn't prove it. It's strong and weak. If something's happened a lot in the past, we say that that's a strong case of induction, and the pattern is very established. Then we have a stronger case that the probability feels high that it will continue in the future. Now, this doesn't just apply to events. It can also apply to patterns. Like I'm studying a text and I find a pattern, and if I keep finding the pattern, it's likely it'll continue. Because that's what patterns are. By definition, they continue, or it wouldn't be a pattern. I hope that was clear. But induction can never tell you if there's going to be if there's going to be an election in November. But it's a good indicator. But that was the point, that we can't know for sure. So then the next one is deduction. Now, deduction is considered a deductive argument can't be wrong. By definition, it can't be wrong. Now, why can't it be wrong? I'm going to give examples. But the reason is because it's true by virtue of the words used. So if I say, listen carefully to these words, because I'm going to word them carefully. The active word here is the word if. You got to listen for that. If all boys could fly, I'm not saying they do. I'm saying if we lived in a world where all boys could fly, and if it were also the case that Johnny was a boy, would it be the case that Johnny could fly? The answer is yes, but it's iffy. It's based on the if proposition. If we lived in a world where all boys fly and Johnny was a boy, then by the meaning of the word all and boy and fly, yeah, we'd have to say that he flies. If he doesn't, then that's illogical because we've contradicted ourselves. Our conclusion contradicts our premises. Either the first premise or the second premise is wrong if the conclusion is right, and et cetera, vice versa. So deduction measures the consistency of your words. So in a system, in a fantasy world where boys fly and Johnny's a boy and all boys fly without any exception, then by virtue of what I just said, Johnny has to fly. But that doesn't tell us if there's such a world, or if there's a Johnny, or if Johnny can fly, or anything. All men are mortal. Socrates was a man. Socrates is a man, so Socrates was mortal. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, so all men are mortal. Oh, no, wait, I got that wrong. If all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. However, that can't be wrong because by virtue of the words I just used. However, that argument doesn't tell me if Socrates ever lived. And there are people who believe that Socrates may not have lived and that he was an invention of Plato. Socrates never wrote anything down, but Plato claimed to in his dialogues to be conveying the character of Socrates. So there's a debate whether Socrates is a real person that lived or was a fictitious invention of Plato. So all this about all men are mortal doesn't tell us a thing. Logic doesn't tell you anything. Your conclusions in deductive logic, which is the strongest form of logic, which can never be wrong, your conclusions are only as true as your premises. If your premises are wrong, your conclusion is going to be wrong, even if it is logical. So you're forced to go back and establish your premises. But you can't establish your premises because you can't use induction or deduction. So what can you use? Well, I have my premises on good account. So-and-so told me so. Yeah, but so-and-so might be lying. So-and-so might be wrong. So-and-so, your memory, you're also relying on your memory. So the testimony of my memory that my friend Bob told me that he saw such and such. I mean, it's just the testimony of a testimony of a testimony. I'm relying on the testimony of my memory. I look into my memory and I see myself reading a book by a guy named Fred. And Fred described a experiment that was conducted by a group of people called the blah blah. And then to go back. And it's just all testimony, testimony, testimony. Was it true? God, we don't have any method to establish absolute truth. Now, this doesn't mean we should be relativists and go around and go, I don't know, that's your truth. There is no truth. I didn't say that. There probably is a truth. And that's what I'm going to get to next. There probably is a truth. But you don't have a way to establish it formally. Okay? We all trust many things. When I sat down in this chair, I trusted that this chair could hold my weight. How come? Well, I used induction. It's always held my weight in the past, but that wasn't the case when I first sat in it. How did I think I knew it was going to hold me the first time I sat in it? Never sat in it before. Well, because chairs tend to hold me, and I've had a couple break in my life actually, but I survived, and you got to take a chance. What are you going to do? Not sit in a chair, stand all day? So we are forced to act upon beliefs. And there's nothing crazy about that. You can't function at all without it. When you eat food, you're going to have to trust it's not poisoned. You have to trust that you have some basic knowledge about the world. And trusting, testimony is totally legitimate. Almost everything that I claim to know is based on testimony. I didn't come up with anything. I didn't invent logic or any of this. I read it. And so that's all testimony. But I thought about it, and it all made sense to me, and so I'm giving you my opinions. Okay, so, but as I said, we function by believing things. So it's a good idea to believe that there's going to be an election in November if I want to vote, because I need to register, And if I don't believe that we're going to have an election, that's your truth, but not my truth. But then you're kind of a nutball. That's what I'm talking about, solipsism. You're falling into the idea that you're the only person in the world. No, there are truths. Now, next, in that last video, I covered something that probably I should have left for a video by itself. But because I did, I'm going to cover it again. And then I'm going to cover even one more thing. So this video will probably be long. The other one was rather short, about 30 minutes. But This is the thing about skepticism. It's very good. A lot of people complain that critical thinking has gone down. People don't use good critical thinking. Well, what do we mean by critical thinking? That means that you question things, that you don't just presume things. You go and check, or you think about it, or you assume that it could be wrong, and that's called skepticism. It doesn't mean that you're saying it's wrong. It means that your mind is open to, you're open-minded. You haven't become closed-minded and dogmatic. You're willing to reconsider things at any time, and that's how we learn. People who can't do that, they stop learning as they get older. The more dogmatic you are, the more you stop learning. But you don't want to be, there's a joke, you don't want a mind that's so open that your brain falls out. So we strike a balance, and that's called critical thinking. So you tell me something and I go, oh, but I might go, maybe I'll check that later, but you don't have to hurt their feelings. You just be quiet if you're not sure. But that's good. That's not a bad thing to question what you've just heard. And this is based on the fact that we can't know things for sure, but we can have better reason to believe them. And that's my example I gave of Alexander Mercura. Anybody can watch him. His videos are usually pretty long. And he talks very slow with a beautiful English accent. And he is very intelligent. And he is very careful not to make claims, to basically tell you how he came to his assumptions, and he doesn't claim to know for sure anything, but he's doing the best he can to give the truest possible account he can, and explains himself. Well, that's better than a lawyer. Lawyers often we won't talk about it. They sometimes will just do whatever convinces you of something, whereas this person's really trying to be really honest and not mislead anybody about. He's trying to give his reasoning. Now, so there's this good quality that we need to nurture called an open mind and a skeptical mind, and not a mind that is afraid to sit down in the chair because it might break. That's kooky. But when you're buying a chair, you might shake it, see if it's strong. That's not dumb. That's smart. But we all do that, by the way. We check things. We all have some critical thinking. But now there's a problem in philosophy that has to do with this. Now the goal here in this critical thinking business is to be open-minded. Okay? The goal isn't to be closed-minded. The goal is to have an open mind so that you're a lifelong learner. So there's a little issue that rose in philosophy a very long time ago. It's actually brought up to Socrates, and he pointed out a problem with it. He said the argument goes like this: we can't know anything. Okay, we can't know anything, which sounds like what I've been saying, and that to some extent it's true. It's what I have been saying. We can't. Maybe Jesus can, but we can't. God can, but we can't. If there is a God, by definition, he's omniscient. He knows everything. So he knows if he exists, but I don't know, because even in Meher Baba's system, where we're all God, if you don't have that experience of God realization, then you're really not. I'm a man, okay? And I am limited. And so what's the point? So it came to Socrates, this thing that we can't know anything. And then, and it's been pointed out so many times, it's always part of every academic study of philosophy. If you say that you can't know anything, you've contradicted yourself, because you're making a knowledge claim about what can be known. And you've just said we can't know anything. But you're acting like you know this. You know that we can't know anything. that, this is like, it's kind of like the claim there is no truth. Well, how do you know? You're making a truth claim. So that's a contradiction. And remember, in logic, the whole point of logic is to remain consistent, and there's the principle of non-contradiction. We don't want to contradict ourselves, or there's something wrong in our reasoning if we do. Or that's the general premise of philosophy, really, but most importantly, deductive logic. If you've made a contradiction, you've made a mistake. Go back and look again. Now, and by the way, not having a contradiction doesn't prove you're right, because there can be all kinds of wrong systems that don't have any contradiction. Just like, you get it. So now I propose, thinking about this problem, because it's a problem, because we want to have that open-mindedness of critical thinking, but a critical thinking that keeps us open-minded to the possibility that we might know something in the future. Be looking for truth. Because if you just go, well, nothing can be known, you might stop looking to know. You might stop seeking the truth. You might become kind of a nudge and just, we can't know. You know those people, they're horrible. So we want to always be like trying to know, even if it seems from everything I've said that knowledge is not possible, because I haven't said knowledge. Well, I kind of have, but I'm going to qualify it in a minute. So I proposed another in writing. It's in my writing, and I wanted to cover it in this topic because I think it pertains. There's another kind of skepticism I noticed, and I call it positive skepticism. So negative skepticism doesn't work and leads to contradiction. It's the view that we can't know anything. So that's called that's skepticism. But positive skepticism would admit that because we don't know yet, then until we know, all things remain possible. Now, what do I mean by all things remain possible? I mean all things that are logical could be possible. In other words, there's no contradiction. So is it possible that there's life, human life on other planets? Yeah. Do I have evidence of it? No. But it's possible. And, science even goes on just the possibility. They don't even know what the probability is. I mean, they pretend they know, but they can't actually know that. They don't have the facts to build a probability argument. But it's possible. What would stop it? So is it possible that though we don't know how we can know anything, that somebody might suddenly discover a way? That there's like some other kind of logic that by the way, in the retroduction, also called abduction, does not. It's the same as these two. It doesn't tell you for fact if something's true. It's only strong and weak and iffy. But I'm not going into it because it'd take too long. And there's a lot of controversy over it because it's new. But let me continue. So the positive skepticism asserts in lieu of knowing, otherwise, I admit that from my perspective, it's all things remain possible. Until I know otherwise, it remains possible. So you come to me and you say almost anything, as long as you're not contradicting yourself and it's not kooky, like, something's both red and not red. Well, that's not actually possible by the law of non-contradiction. So that's not possible. But could my dog be red? I don't have a dog, but let's say I did. Well, it's possible that my neighbor went out with a spray can and sprayed my dog red while I was giving this talk. So unbeknownst to me, it's possible he could be red. But that's a crazy example, but I have to think these up as I go because I don't have a script. Okay, so when I say all things are possible, I have that very open mind, which was the purpose of the critical thinking. The critical thinking wasn't to be a nudge that says, oh, I'm not even looking for truth anymore because we can't, it's not possible. Nobody can have truth. Oh, that's your truth. And what about my truth? That's nuts. That's not even critical thinking. That's crazy dogma. But when I go, all things are possible, I'm making a positive assertion, and I'm not even claiming it's possible that there is something that's not possible, but then that's possible. In lieu of knowing, being omniscient, it will remain that all things are possible. It's even possible that in the next moment, I will know one thing or everything, okay? And in spirituality, that exists. It's called enlightenment. So, am I enlightened? No. But is it possible that it's that enlightenment occurs? Yes, I think it's possible. I think that partly because of this view I have, that I'm open to that to any possibility. You know, I talk a lot about Meher Baba, a Indian guru who lived in the 19th century. And I quote him a lot, and I think very highly of his books. But is it possible that he was wrong? Of course it is. Is it possible he was a fraud, a shyster, a hoaxer, or whatever? Yes. To me, it's possible. I don't have any argument that he's anything. I've never made an argument that Meher Baba is anything more than a person who wrote the books that I've read that have changed my thinking and given me new rabbit holes to go down, if you want, and to consider that other people seem to lack because they wanted to know if he was really, God or something like he said he was. By the way, that's a subject for another day. I'll talk about that. Meher Baba said he was God, but he also said everybody's God. We'll talk about that another time. So it doesn't fit here. So, but it kind of does, because if he were some kind of fully enlightened human being, maybe he does know the things that he says. So that's possible. It's possible that it doesn't. It's possible that it does. Now, this, of course, doesn't lead to a contradiction. I've contradicted nothing. You'll never find a contradiction. Somebody thought they found one, and I've written it, and I'll quickly go over it. If all things are possible, then it's possible that there's something that's not possible. That sounds like you just contradicted yourself. Well, you didn't, because that's a double negative in there, and if you write it out and you cancel the double negative, you're just saying it's possible that everything's possible. Really, it's true. I've done it many times, and it's real. It's done through cancellation of double negative. So that was that. Now that was, like I say, kind of like a book. These videos, you can stop them. You can watch them again. You can pause it. And you can think. You can. Google's been adding, subtitles automatically to some of my talks, and boy, I've been pretty delighted by that. So it's like a transcript. But anyway, I'm just saying, I get it that I'm going as quickly as I can to make this video not unendurable. And but now I'm going to get to the last thing, which I actually covered in the first video, which was only 30 minutes. And that is a subject of a kind of logic that I discovered. Just like I discovered positive skepticism, which is a real skepticism, it makes my mind open, which is the point of skepticism, without making me contradict myself by making a logic claim that I claim I can't make. By the way, when I say all things are possible, I don't mean they're all probable. Probability is a different subject, and it's quantifiable. Okay, possible has very little weight epistemologically, because of anything that's doesn't where there's no contradiction is technically possible. But because there's so many, almost an infinite number of propositions you could make that would then be possible, possible is virtually ubiquitous and therefore trivial. Trivial means that it has no implications. So if it's possible that my dog is blue, we can't really infer anything from that. It doesn't follow from that anything. It's certainly not any evidence that my dog is blue. It's just possibility is trivial. And sometimes really smart people, they say, you know, there's a real non-trivial possibility that blah, 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 because they see that possibility is trivial. A philosopher will understand what I just said. Trivialness is a part of logic. So, you know, a rose is a rose. That's true, but it's trivial. It doesn't tell you anything. You can't infer anything from that. I don't know if you have a rose or if their roses are good or bad. It's just, well, if there's a rose, well, then there's a rose, because logically that's true. That also will be followed by philosophers. They know what I'm talking about. Okay, so now we're going to get to this last thing. When I was writing my second book, and that included 2 years of just reading and creating notes, even though the book came out kind of short, I had a much longer, earlier draft, which I got completely bogged down into because I had included too much. But this point made it into the final 250-page book. The book's called The Evolution of Perception Re-Explained, which is kind of like I'm doing now. I sometimes, or often, re-explain things in my hope that I'll do a better job, because I'm aware that I'm not a genius at explaining things, but I'm always trying to get better, because it's possible I can get better. Because I'm not dogmatic that I'm done. So this was that if logic can't tell us anything, and you know, most of what we claim to know, we know from testimony, and whose testimony to trust is based on basically just a flip of the coin. I mean, I trust this person's opinion or this person's observation, while another person claims to have observed something else. This happens all the time. And we have to make that choice, and we make that choice on pretty subjective grounds that are not very provable, that I kind of trust Alexander McCura, but somebody else might trust somebody else. And are my reasons perfect? No, it's possible that he's wrong sometimes, and he admits that. So in my book, I have this theory of perception of an evolution of these schemas. So there was these ways of perceiving that actually produced the apparent world. That there's not a world we don't see creating the one we do, our experience, but our experience actually evolved. And we evolved in that evolution. We appeared out of that, supervened out of that process ourselves. So you have to read the book, but that's what it says. Now, I wanted to give, when I wrote my first book, 17 years earlier, in 2004, it's called The Evolution of Perception, and the Cosmology of Substance. I didn't claim to have a stronger argument than it seemed more probable because it was a simpler system. You read the book. It's called The Evolution of Perception and the Cosmology of Substance, a simpler theory of everything. So my argument was Occam's razor, which is an old thing from logic from the late Middle Ages, and which a monk named Occam said that, the simpler answer is more likely true. And actually that's actually provable. The less unproved assumptions you have, the more likely it can be true. Almost just like if I was throwing coins, I only need to have fewer numbers. I'm going to have a higher chance of getting those than if I have to get a whole bunch. So it's actually quantifiably more probable that a simpler explanation is more likely to be true. Now, that doesn't prove it's true, and so I never claimed to have proven my theory, but I did claim that I could prove that it was simpler. And since, for the most part, simplicity is the criterion that science uses to make choices between two conflicting explanations, I figured, well, it's at least as good as the scientific method. So that was my argument. But, that's not a definite argument. And I admit that. I couldn't prove that this evolution occurred. But in my new book, it started occurring to me that I can. Now, this would contradict a lot of what I've said, or seem to. It would seem to contradict that logic can't establish anything, because your conclusions in logic are only as true as your premises. And if your premises were wrong because you misunderstood what you saw, or the person that told you lied, then your conclusion is going to be wrong. So it's only as true as your premises, and you can't prove your premises. Not perfectly. Not with logic. You have to come to the logic with your premises. I believe that, Socrates was a man. There's a premise. Do I know he was a man? No, it's possible he was invented by Plato. So, let's get back on this. Even if I had a script for what I'm saying right now, I would be stuck trying to find the point where I left off in the script, so it wouldn't help. I've tried that. So now, it started to occur to me as I was preparing and then writing, it got clearer and clearer, the evolution of perception re-explained, that I did have an argument, that I am fairly certain establishes that this theory has to be true. Now that sounds like a pretty bold claim in light of everything that I've just said. But one thing it's consistent with, as I said, it's possible that in the next moment, we're going to discover some way you can know something. Maybe not everything, but something. And then in the last video, number 11, I said, isn't it ironic that in this, the only thing that we can know for certain is how the universe formed and how it began, which is really crazy. Because how can you know that? That's the past. We can't time travel. Well, in a way we can. I'm going to show why. And I was trying to explain this in the previous video, and I was watching it this morning as I was getting ready for this video, and then I noticed, wow, that wasn't very clear, but that was pretty bold that I tried. And I even said, that might not be very clear in the previous video. You can go back and look toward the end. I said, but I've never tried to say it before. So it's the best I could do. Well, this is the second time I'm going to try to explain it. And it's in my book, as I said. Let's say that I have, that there's a, let's pretend there's a great kind of recipe for a dish, okay? And I have, but I haven't thought of it, okay? And I happen to have in my kitchen all the ingredients for that supposed dish that could be discovered, that has never been discovered. But I have it all. I have all the spices, all the ingredients. So does it follow from that, logically, that I have to create that dish? Obviously not. I mean, I probably have the ingredients for all kinds of dishes I don't even know about, or that may have never been thought of before. But it doesn't follow that I'm going to discover them all or make them all. So we can't, just because the conditions are there, I can't say with certainty that it'll occur. So let's say, there's a glass on the edge of a table, and it's like this cup. It's on the edge of a table, and it's pretty precarious. And there's waiters and waitresses and everything running past, and I'm watching it, and I'm sitting in a restaurant. So the conditions are there for it to fall over and spill. But does it follow from that it will fall over and spill for certain? Do I know that for certain? No. The conditions are there, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Now let's run this in reverse. Let's say that you come over and there's that dish I was just talking about. I have it set out on the table, and I'm having guests come, and you're the first one, serving you some wine, and we're going to eat that dish. Does it follow from that I had the ingredients for that dish? Yes. Oh, are you sure? Yeah, I'm positive. How can you be certain? Because it's deductive. That dish is those ingredients. By definition, that dish, I can name every ingredient as part of the name of the dish. By definition, that dish requires that those ingredients have preceded its being made, because it's made out of those ingredients. So what I've shown is that you don't know what's going to follow in the future, but if something has occurred, then sometimes we can know what happened in the past, because if it's a necessary condition for it's happening now, okay? If it's a necessary condition, it necessarily preceded it, okay? This is the idea, that you can move backward, and it's actually using deduction. So let me give you another example, because it's the best I can do, but I hope the principle will become clearer. And this is in my book. Imagine I use an iMac to make my videos, and it's a desktop computer made by Apple, and so to operate it, obviously it's an electrical device, and so you have to plug it in to turn it on, to run it. You need a lot of other things too to run it. You need an operating system. You need a lot of things, but you definitely need electricity, because it's an electrical appliance. My computer. Maybe one day it'll run different. That's the way the computers are today. So, could there have been, assuming there was a person named Julius Caesar, living just in the 1st century BC, and let's say he lives in a big palace, and let's say in the palace there's an office, and you go in, time traveler walks into Julius Caesar's office, and on Julius Caesar's desk is an iMac. Okay. And it's on. It's a running iMac. And let me ask, is it, and it's plugged in, because it has to run, because that's what an iMac is. It's an electrical appliance that needs electricity by definition of what an electrical appliance is. So is the invention of electricity a necessary precondition for Caesar having a iMac on his desk? Yes, it is. That's why he didn't have one, because the necessary conditions hadn't come. Since the 1st century BC, all kinds of events happened where we discovered all kinds of materials, metallurgy, glass, clear glass, discovery of electricity, discovery of the alternating current, all these things. And now we have computer. And that's not even to mention all the programming that went into it, which I'll mention in a second. But the necessary preconditions were occurring during those 2,000 years. That's how come we have the computer. Do we know this for sure? Did we have to? Yes, we absolutely know it for sure. If my computer is made has parts that are made of plastic, so is the discovery of plastic, not very that long ago, a necessary condition? Yes. I had to have discovered plastic before I made an iMac. So what about the programs that it's running? Well, there's a whole lot of math that was necessary that had to come before they could program computers and even create a working operating system. And I don't have my computer. Bertrand Russell and oh God, a partner, I can't remember his name. They did a book at the turn of the century, like 1903, and something Mathematica. Anybody can look it up. My memory's not great, but it's a necessary condition toward. It's like a 2-volume big book on math and logic. That is a necessary condition for the computer age. There are other discoveries, modal logic. I can't remember who was the main instigator of modal logic. That's the logic of possibilities. That is a necessary condition for computers also. So there's all kinds of mathematics and logic necessary for man to discover before he can program a computer and there be a Mac, an iMac. So when we look at an iMac, we're not guessing that the necessary conditions preceded it. They can come after it. They had to precede it because that's the very meaning of necessary and precondition. So how do we know that? It's actually deductively known because it's analytically true. It's true a priori. That means you don't even have to go check. You don't have to time travel to see if they had electricity before they created electrical appliances. You know that because it's a necessary condition by the virtue of the words involved. So this is a real shocking development if I'm right. And anybody can check it and think about it and be, is it possible that I've got something wrong? Sure. I have to admit that by my own principles. I don't think it is because I think it's possible it's right. I think it is right. But that's me. And so you'd have to look for yourself with that open mind. Not that closed mind of nothing, knowledge is not possible, but that open mind of all things are possible. Now, if this is true, then it's ironic because one of the things that we can never know normally in philosophy, and everybody admits, is we can't really know the past. We can't know the past because you'd have to time travel. And, well, personally, I don't believe in time travel, even if a lot of people today do. I don't. But anyway, do it. Go time travel. But that's how you'd have to find out things in the past. But I believe that you can know the past better than you can know the future for the reasons I just explained, like the water glass on the edge of the table. I don't know it's going to fall. But if I come into the room and there's water all over the floor and the cup is laying on the floor, I can pretty much know there's arguments that they could be there, like somebody said it, like a set dresser. But so that's not the perfect example. But often from the conditions, I can determine that the preconditions were there. Okay. So let me give one more example and then I'll be done. Let's say that the universe is in space and the universe is spatial, okay? That means it has things in the universe and the universe itself. Maybe if it goes on forever, so that you couldn't quantify it, but it occupies all of space. Then we would say, but a smaller object like a planet, it occupies a finite amount of space, and you can quantify how much space in volume and in length and weight and all kinds of things in space. Well, weight's different, but we'll talk about it another time. So is space a necessary precondition for the things that exist in space? Of course it is. I mean, you have a planet, and then after planets evolved, space came along. It doesn't make any sense. Space is a necessary precondition for things in space. And time is a necessary condition for any of this evolution at all, because obviously they happen in a sequence of what? A temporal sequence. First, there was space, and then there were objects in space. But for that to have happened, which implies an occurrence in time, time had to have existed. So, or at least been apparent. Even if it's not real, it had to be a condition of perception. So it's a necessary condition. And then this is the logic that I used. And I say, so therefore, there was first time, and then there was space, and there were the things that occur. And, motion is ratios of time and space. So before there could be motion, there had to be space. Before there was space, there had to be time. And so the narrative of the evolution of perception is not ad hoc. It has to be true a priori. And that's really quite shocking. And that is the end of this video, and I'm sure some people are going to have some problems with what I just said. But I think it'll get you thinking. Anyway, thank you for listening. I always enjoy it. I always enjoy any feedback. Take it easy. Bye-bye.